game didn't have Paul George, which hurt them, although Boston didn't have Jaylen Brown. And Jayson Tatum has crushed the Clippers, it seems like, every time they play. Jayson Tatum, whenever anybody asks me, who are you most impressed with around the NBA? Last year, I got this question all the time. Now that you've seen every team, you've seen every player in person, who impressed you more than like you thought they would? Jayson Tatum's the first answer every single time. He is out of this world impressive. I think I've said this a couple times. I think he'll win the MVP by the time he's 27 years old. He's that good. And so he's crushed the Clippers. But to go back point, those two games, it was a lack of execution in the final 3 or so minutes from LA. And they had those issues earlier this season. Well, for the most part, those issues have been somewhat fixed with Rondo there. You look at a close game against the Phoenix Suns, they pull it out in the end. You look at a close game at points in the fourth quarter against the Pacers on the road, they pull it out in the end. A close game against Detroit without their 2 stars and without Marcus Morris, without really all 5 starters essentially. Well, they pull it out down the stretch. And Rondo's IQ, he's coached up his teammates. His calming presence has been a huge factor. So he's really made his mark early on this team. They've only lost once since he made his debut, and that was a 3-point loss in they had chances down the stretch. So you feel good about where this team is right now. Everyone you talk to, including T. Lou, has just said, we feel really great about the position we're at this point of the season. And they've got, I think, 13 or so games remaining to just finish up, I guess, fixing up whatever small issues they might have going into the postseason.
It's going to be a battle in the West. We got to talk about Tatum after you said that. The Celtics fans have gone through an interesting, and I'll go back to the first time I ever saw him out there in Syracuse when he was playing the Orange in that epic game where John Gillen hit the half-court shot, and everyone was going crazy about that, obviously, but I was looking at it and saying, did you just see that guy on the other side? I mean, he had, if I remember right, it was 25 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, and he wasn't running the offense, but he was, making these plays out of the short roll, impacting the defensive side of the floor. He had that crazy Euro step in transition, and I said, this guy doesn't belong on this court. This guy could be in the NBA right now, dominating. And then eventually the Celtics got into that lottery. I remembered that day, and I'm like, there were different doubts about his shooting and his defense and this and that, but I just remember seeing him that game and just instantly knowing, like, this guy's going to belong in that league at some level. Now, what he's accomplished, I never imagined. So early in his career, I think people forget. They say he's 19. That's like the joke in Celtics fan. He's been 19 forever, really 23 at this point. But instantly into the league, impact defender, borderline all-defensive guy last year, which is what goes underrated about his game. And then the offense speaks for itself. Then in the bubble last year, at 22, becoming the playmaker that he did, 4 assists a game, running the offense for large stretches of that playoff run. He did have a few games here or there where the turnovers got a little high, and I felt like that cost him a few games. But again, you look at the total package here and say he's not going to hit his prime for a couple more years, and he's already one of the best players in the game, period. And so, I hear you say that. In Celtics land, there's been a little overreaction this year because the team's been up and down. He's had his up and downs through COVID, and people are wondering, oh, is he really that great? Now he's come back in a big way this past month, 50, 40, 90, 44-point game, 50-point game, looking like that February 2020 version of himself. But what makes you say this guy is the most impressive player in the league to you?
So he's the biggest thing is he grew more, so he's even bigger than
oh
he
my
was
Lord.
when he first got into the league. And then he filled into his frame. So it's a combination, right? When we saw him at Duke, he was wiry. He was definitely thin, but you could see the makings of what would be a strong player. And so we were watching that game. They had Tatum. They had my boy Luke Kennard, who's with the Clippers right now. And they had Grayson Allen. That was a good Duke team. And they may have even had Harry Giles on that team as well. And so they had
Jefferson. That was Jefferson.
I think they had Giles too. I want to say
they
had both
off the
of them.
bench. Yeah. I mean, that team should have went way further than it did, looking back on it.
Agreed. And so they were good. They were a good team, and Kennard was, I believe, their leading scorer that year. But Tatum, you're right. It's the fluidity in his game. It's just he can do a little bit of everything. His ball handling skill is outstanding. He can get his shot off over anybody. And I think that's the biggest key, right? It does not matter how close a defender is. It doesn't matter how draped the defender is. It doesn't matter what caliber that defender is. He gets his shot off. Doesn't matter. And you know exactly what he's going to do. Little step back to his right or left. You know exactly what's coming. Doesn't matter. You can't guard it. and he's just unfazed defensively. And so I think we've seen a toughness, we've seen a willingness to do whatever it takes to win. And I've heard from many people now that he works as hard as anybody around the league. And when you hear that and you hear his desire to continue to get better, to me, that just spells a recipe for a guy who's only going to get better and keep improving, which is scary because he's already, to me, one of the best wings in the NBA. And you give him a couple of years, I think he'll be an MVP within the next 4 years.